Chapter 15. Luke sat up, checking his arms to make sure she hadn't broken anything. "You're lying," the girl said, but she made no effort to tackle him again. She crouched, looking puzzled for a few moments. Then she grinned. "I got it. You're another one. Great code word. I'll have to think about using that for the rally." Now it was Luke's turn to squint in confusion. The girl giggled. "I mean, you're another shadow child, right?" Shadow? Luke wondered why his brain seemed to be slowing down. Was it just because she seemed several miles ahead of him? "That's not the term you use," she said. "I thought shadow child was universal. But, an illegal, someone whose parents broke population law 3,903. A third. I..." Luke couldn't bring himself to confess. He'd broken so many taboos today, leaving the house, standing in the open yard, talking to a stranger. Why did one more violation matter? "You can say it," the girl coaxed. "I'm a third child. Why should there be anything wrong with that?" Luke was spared having to answer her, because she suddenly sprang to her feet, exclaiming, "Oh no, the alarm!" She raced down the hall and around the corner. Luke followed to find her jerking open a closet door, then punching buttons on a panel of colored lights. Too late. Drat! She ran to the phone, Luke following breathlessly. She dialed. Luke watched in amazement. He'd never talked on a phone. His parents had told him the government could trace calls, could tell if a voice on the phone was from a person who was allowed to exist or not. "Dad," she made a face. "I know. Call the security company and get them to cancel the alarm, okay?" Pause. "And might I remind you that the penalty for harboring a shadow child is $5 million or execution depending on the mood of the judge?" She rolled her eyes at Luke while she listened to what seemed to be a long answer. "Oh, these things happen." Another pause. Yeah, love you too. Thanks, Dad." She hung up. Luke wondered if he ran back to his house immediately before the population police really did show up. "They can find you now," Luke said, "just from the phone." The girl laughed. "They say, but everybody knows the government's not that competent." Luke started inching toward the back door just in case. "But there really was an alarm?" he asked. "And you have security guards?" "Sure. Doesn't everybody?" As soon as she'd said that, Luke decided to ignore the insult. "Do the security guards know you're here?" he asked. "Of course not," the girl said. "If they came, I'd have to hide. Personally, I think my family just has the alarm system to make sure I stay in the house. They don't know I can disable it. But," she gave him an evil grin, "I set it off sometimes, just for fun." "That's fun?" Luke asked. He thought another third child would understand him, be just like him. This girl sure wasn't. "Aren't you scared the guards might find you?" "Not really," the girl shrugged. "And see, doing it on purpose every now and then helped us today. My dad didn't really even ask why the system needed to be stopped. He just thought it was me troubling again." In a twisted way, she kind of made sense, but trying to figure everything out made Luke's head hurt. He glanced toward the door. If he could just get home safely, he'd never complain about being bored again. Here he felt as baffled as Alice in Wonderland from one of the old books in the attic. Or he remembered something he read in a nature book. Maybe he was like the prey of a snake that was hypnotized its victims before it ate them. He didn't think the girl would hurt him, but she might keep him confused and fascinated until the population police or the security guards or someone else arrived. The girl saw where he was looking. "Am I scaring you?" she asked. "Shadow kids can be so jumpy. You're safe, you know. How about if we start over? Would you care for a seat? What's your name anyway?" Luke told her. "Nice to meet you," the girl said, shaking his hand in a way that made him feel like she was kind of making fun of him. Then she led him to sit down on a couch in the room he'd first entered. She perched beside him. "I'm Jen. Really, it's Jennifer Rose Talbot, but do I look like a Jennifer?" She shook her head and spread out her arms as if Luke should understand something from her rumpled sweatshirt and messy hair. Luke frowned. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know any Jennifers. Just Matthew and Mark and Mother and Dad." He knew his parents' real names were Edna and Harlan, but he wondered if he shouldn't keep that the secret, just in case. Probably he shouldn't even have mentioned Matthew and Mark, but he was surprised into it, thinking suddenly about how there was a world full of people outside his house, with a world full of different names he'd never heard of. The girl said. "Then I have to explain. A Jennifer's supposed to be like really girly, so that the joke's on Mom. She wanted some frilly little girl she could put in lacy dresses and sit in a corner, like a doll. She paused. Are Matthew and Mark your older brothers? Luke nodded. So you've never met anyone outside your immediate family? Luke shook his head no. Jen looked so confused. She felt he had to defend himself. And have you? He asked, with almost the same taunting voice he sometimes used with Mark. Well, yeah, she said. You're a third child too, Luke protested. A shadow child, right? He suddenly felt like it might be easy to cry if he let himself. All his life he'd been told he couldn't do everything Matthew and Mark did because he was a third child. But if Jen could go about freely, it didn't make sense. Had his parents lied? Don't you have to hide? He asked. Sure, Jen said. Mostly. But my parents are very good at bribery, and so am I. She grinned wickedly, then squinted at Luke. How did you know I was a third child? How did you know I was here? Luke told her. Somehow it seemed important to start with the woods coming down, so it turned into a very long story. Jen interrupted frequently with questions and comments. So you've never been away from your house except to go to the backyard or barn? You've stayed inside for 6 months? And gosh, you must really hate these houses, huh? And then when he got to the part about seeing her face in the window, she bit her lip. My dad would kill me if he knew I'd done that. But the mirrors were messed up, and Carlos bet me I didn't even know what the weather was outside. And huh? Luke said. Mirrors? Carlos? Jen waved away his questions. Luke Garner, she announced solemnly, you have come to the right place. Forget the hiding like a mole stuff. I'm your ticket out. Chapter 16. Want any more potatoes, Luke? Mother offered that night at supper. Luke, her voice got more intensified. Luke! Luke jerked his attention back to his family. Mother was holding the bowl of mashed potatoes out to him. No, Luke said. No thanks, I've still got some. More for me, Mark crowded. Luke turned them out again. He'd barely eaten his first serving of potatoes. He'd been so busy thinking about his secret visit to the Sports family house. He couldn't believe he'd dared to go. Just the thought of him running through her yard and his feet beat fast, remembering fear and pride. He'd really done it. And then meeting Jen was amazing. There was no word for it. He was so overwhelmed with wonder at everything he'd seen in her house, everything she'd told him, and he started to say, Did you know that Jen? At the last minute he clamped his teeth shut, holding the words in. He thought he'd burst. He could feel his face flush red with the effort of keeping still. He bent his head low over his plate so nobody could see. How could he manage to keep Jen a secret? But he had to, because if he told them, they'd forbid him to go back, and all he had to do was go back. We'll set up a signal, Jen had said, something that I can see. But you don't have any vents to look out like I do, Luke protested. You can't look out the windows. Oh, when the mirrors work, it's not a problem. Look. She took him over to the window near the sliding glass door and showed him a window near the sliding glass door. It showed him a mirror that reflected a wide view of the Talbots' backyard and the landscape beyond. It showed just the corner of the Garner's farm, but when Jen turned it a bit, the entire Garner house came into view. Luke wondered if his parents could set up the same kind of system. Then he looked at the mirror again and decided it might be expensive. And anyhow, how would he explain where he'd gotten the idea? So let's see, Jen said. A signal. I've got it. How about if I look out every morning at 9, and if you come over, you shine a flashlight at me. I'll shine one back if everything's safe. We don't have any flashlights, Luke said. Not that work, I mean. Jen frowned. Why not? We haven't had any batteries in it. I don't know, 4 or 5 years, Luke explained. In fact, he felt proud even to remember what a flashlight was. Okay, Jen said. No flashlight, no computer. Oh, we have a computer, Luke said. My parents do, and I think it still works. But it's in Dad's office in the front of the house, and I'm not allowed in there. And anyway, I'd never be allowed to touch the computer. He remembered once when he was young, maybe 3 or 4, he'd follow Mother into Dad's office while she was cleaning. The rows of letters on the computer keyboard had looked like a toy to him. He'd reached one finger up and tapped the space bar over and over again. Mother had turned around and freaked out. They can find you now, she'd scream, if they were watching. And for weeks after, she'd hidden him even more carefully than ever, locking him in his room when she had to go outside. Jen rolled her eyes. Don't tell me your family believes that government propaganda stuff, she said. They spent so much money trying to convince people they can monitor all the TVs and computers. They can't have afforded to actually do it. I've been using our computer since I was 3, and watching TV too, and they've never caught me. How about a candle? What? It took Luke a minute to realize she was talking about the signal again. The candles. They're all in the kitchen, and I'm not allowed. Jen mimicked the words as he had to go. To go in there. They've got you on an awfully short leash, don't they? She asked. No, yes, but they're just trying to protect me. Jen shook her head. Yeah, I've heard that one. Ever hear of disobeying? Luke started defensively. I'm here, aren't I? Jen laughed. Got me. But listen, if you can't do candles or a flashlight, how about just turning on a light that I can see? Luke was quicker this time, figuring out that she was talking about the signal. The one on the back door, he said. You can't miss it. He wasn't allowed to turn that on either, but he didn't dare say not allowed again. Now Luke toyed with his mashed potatoes. His entire conversation with Jen had been like that. She mocked, he defended, but she always got her way. Of course, he defended her to himself. She knew and had seen so much more than him. After he'd finished his story on the couch, she told him hers. First, she said defiantly, my parents had me on purpose, 13 years ago. Mom already had Bull and Braun from their first marriage. Your brothers? Luke said. Yeah, Bulletin and Brownlee, really, but but what kind of names are those for the knuckleheads like them? Mom was going through some snobbish upper class phase with um, with husband number 1. She'd had more than one husband? Luke asked. He didn't know that was possible. Sure, Jen said. Dad, who's really my stepdad, is number 3. Luke found that was so confusing. He just kept his mouth shut. Anyhow, Jen said, Mom was dying to have a little girl, so when she and her husband, number 2, got together, she went and paid some doctor lots of money so she could get pregnant. What if you'd been a boy? Oh, they got it in the beginning of the gender selection experiments. That means they made sure I was a girl. Doctors can do that, But the government outlawed the procedure because they were afraid it'd throw the population even more out of whack. I'm sure my parents paid a lot for it. Were your mom and dad trying for a girl? Luke thought about it. He remembered Mother saying she'd wanted 4 boys, but she would have wanted a girl even more. Someone like Mother? He couldn't really picture a girl in his house. They weren't trying for anything. I was a surprise. Look, Jen nodded. I didn't think they paid for you. That sounded really terrible, didn't it? I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, you're the first person I've met who wasn't barren. How do you know I'm not? Well, Jen waved her hand in a way that made Luke even more aware of the contrast between his ragged flannel shirt and patched jeans. Jen's perfect house. Look, don't be mad. It doesn't matter, or maybe it does, but I think it's cool that you're not a baron. You could help even more. Help? With the rally, Jen said. She bit her lip. Should I? There's no way you could be an infiltrator, is there? Can I trust you? Of course you can, Luke said. He felt insulted again. Jen leaned her head back to stare at the ceiling as if an answer were written there. Then she looked back at Luke. I'm sorry, I'm botching this. I'm not really used to talking, just on the net. Look, I trust you, but I'm not the only one involved. So let's wait, okay? Okay, Luke said. He couldn't help but sounding injured. Jen looked over and gave his shoulder a quick shake. Oh, don't say it like that. Say, okay, Jen, I respect your judgment. Or, okay, Jen, whatever you think is best. That's what Dad tells me I should say when I disagree with him. Can you believe it? Lawyers. Your dad's a lawyer? Yeah, all Mom's husbands have been. Strange taste, huh? Number 1 was an environmental lawyer, and all things. Number 2 was corporate. That's how they had enough money to get me. And number 3, Dad, is with the government. High up, I might add. But if you're illegal, Luke hadn't thought he could get any more confused. Jen laughed. Haven't you learned? Government leaders are the worst ones for breaking laws. How do you think we got this house? How do you think I got internet access? How do you think we live? I don't know. I don't think I know much about anything. Jen patted his head as if he were a little kid or a dog. That's okay, she said. You'll learn. It wasn't long after that Luke said he had to leave because he was afraid Dad or Matthew or Mark might come home for lunch a little early. He dreaded the trip back. Jen walked him to the door, chattering the whole time. I'll fix the screen and deal with the security system so no one will ever hear you. She said, oh no. Luke followed her gaze. She was staring at 3 pin points of blood on the carpet. I'm sorry, Luke said. That must be from when I scraped my hand. I'll clean it up. There's still time. Secretly he was glad for the delay. "No, no," she said impatiently. "I don't care about the carpet. It's just that Mom and Dad will know, and when they see I don't have any cuts." And then before Luke could even knew what he was doing, she thrust her hand toward the torn part of the screen, jagged edge. Didn't cut immediately, so she held the screen with her right hand and raked it across her left. When Jen pulled up her hand, Luke saw a gash even deeper than his. Jen squeezed out a few drops of blood and let them fall on the carpet. "There," she said. Stunned, Luke backed out the door. "Come back soon, farmer boy," Jen said. Luke turned and ran, blinking blindly, not even slowing down to creep alongside the barn. He went straight to the back door of his house, yanked it open, and let it bang shut behind him. Now, sitting at supper, he felt his heart pounding again, as he thought how dangerous that had been. Why hadn't he looked first? Why hadn't he crawled? He poked his fork into his potatoes, now gone cold and congealed. He watched his mother gathering up dirty dishes, while Dad, Matthew, and Mark leaned back in their chairs, talking of the grain yard. Jen had scared him. That was why. Seeing her cut her hand had terrified him. How could she do something like that for him when they'd just met?